Ancient China's first clearly proven dynasty did not begin with philosophers, emperors, or the Great Wall. It began with cracked bones, bronze weapons, human sacrifice, and kings who believed the dead could decide the fate of the living. More than 3,000 years ago, in the Yellow River Valley of northern China, a powerful Bronze Age kingdom rose out of a world of farming villages, rival clans, warfare, rituals, and fear. This kingdom was the Shang Dynasty. And if you want to understand where recorded Chinese civilization truly begins, you have to start here. Not with the famous emperors of later China, not with the Silk Road, not with kung fu legends or palace dramas, but with a world where rulers asked questions to turtle shells, where bronze vessels were treated like sacred technology, and where the boundary between politics and religion barely existed. The Shang Dynasty is usually dated from around 1600 BC to 1046 BC. That means it existed around the same broad ancient world as New Kingdom Egypt, the Hittites, Babylon, and Mycenaean Greece. But unlike many later images of China, the Shang world was not a unified empire ruling all of East Asia. It was a powerful regional kingdom centered in the Yellow River region, surrounded by allies, enemies, conquered peoples, and rival cultures. This is important because many people outside China imagine ancient Chinese history as one continuous empire from the beginning. It was not. Early China was much more fragmented, experimental, and violent. The Shang were not ruling the China we know today. They were helping create the foundations of what Chinese civilization would become. Before the Shang, Chinese tradition speaks of the Zhou Dynasty, often described as the first dynasty. But the Zhou remains difficult to prove with the same level of direct evidence. The Shang is different. With the Shang, we have cities, tombs, bronze vessels, weapons, workshops, chariots, and most importantly, writing. The Shang left behind oracle bones, pieces of turtle shell and animal bone carved with early Chinese characters. These bones are some of the earliest written records ever found in East Asia. Because of them, the Shang are not just a legend told by later historians. They are a civilization that still speaks to us in its own words. And what those words reveal is fascinating. The Shang kings did not ask abstract philosophical questions. They asked direct, urgent questions. Will it rain? Will the harvest succeed? Should we attack this enemy? Will the king's toothache go away? Will the queen give birth safely? Will our ancestors approve this sacrifice? These questions were carved into bone, heated until the bone cracked, and then interpreted by diviners. To modern eyes, this may look strange, but to the Shang, this was government. This was intelligence gathering. This was religion, politics, weather forecasting, military planning, and royal anxiety, all fused into one system. The Shang king was not just a ruler. He was a warrior, a priest, a commander, and a living bridge between the human world and the ancestral world. In Shang belief, dead ancestors were not gone. They were powerful. They could bless the living or punish them. They could help in war, protect crops, bring illness, or influence childbirth. So the king's job was not only to command soldiers and collect resources, he had to manage relationships with the dead. That sounds mysterious, but politically it made sense. If the king was the only person who could properly communicate with the ancestors, then his power was not just military. It was sacred. To challenge the king was not merely to challenge a man. It was to challenge the order of the universe. This is one reason Shang rule was so deeply tied to ritual. And nothing shows that ritual power more clearly than bronze. Shang bronze vessels are among the greatest artistic and technological achievements of the ancient world. These were not simple bowls or cooking pots. They were heavy, complex, beautifully decorated ritual objects used in ceremonies involving wine, food, offerings, and ancestor worship. Some were covered with strange animal faces, curling horns, sharp eyes, dragons, birds, and mask-like patterns. One famous pattern is often called the Tao Tie, a mysterious face that seems to stare out from the bronze itself. We do not fully know what every design meant, and that mystery is part of their power. But we do know this. Bronze was not just decoration. Bronze was authority. Bronze was status. Bronze was proof that you belonged to the elite world of kings, nobles, rituals, and ancestors. Producing these vessels required enormous skill and organization. The Shang had to mine metal, transport materials, prepare molds, control fire, manage labor, and coordinate. Specialists. A large bronze vessel was not just an object. It was a message. It said, "This family has power. This king commands people. This court controls sacred knowledge and rare materials." The most famous Shang bronze vessel is often associated with the Humu Wu Ding, formerly widely called the Simu Wu Ding. It is massive, heavy, and astonishing. When you look at an object like that, you are not just seeing art. You are seeing the machinery of an early state. You are seeing labor, hierarchy, ritual, and command captured in metal. But the Shang world was not built only by kings and artisans. It was built by ordinary people whose names mostly disappeared. Most people were farmers. They grew crops such as millet, and in some regions rice and wheat were also known. They raised animals including pigs, dogs, cattle, sheep, and horses. They worked land, paid obligations, served elites, and lived under a system where power was concentrated at the top. At the highest level stood the king and royal family. Around them were nobles, military leaders, ritual specialists, scribes, diviners, and skilled craftsmen. Below them were farmers and laborers. At the bottom were captives and enslaved people, many of whom came from warfare. This was not a gentle society. It was creative, organized, and spiritually rich, but it was also brutal. War was central to Shang power. Oracle bone inscriptions mention campaigns against neighboring groups. The Shang fought for territory, resources, captives, and prestige. The king's ability to wage war helped prove his strength. Victories brought wealth and human prisoners. Some captives became laborers. Some were used in ritual sacrifice. This is one of the darkest parts of Shang civilization, and it should not be softened. Archaeological evidence shows that human sacrifice existed in Shang royal rituals and burials. Some tombs included human victims, sometimes in large numbers. To us, this is horrifying. To the Shang elite, it was connected to their beliefs about power, death, and the afterlife. They believed the dead still required service, offerings, and support. A powerful person in life expected power in death. That belief shaped their tombs, their sacrifices, and their rituals. The royal tombs at Yinshu, near modern Anyang in Henan province, show this clearly. Yinshu, also called the ruins of Yin, was the last major Shang capital and one of the most important archaeological sites in China. Here, archaeologists discovered palace foundations, royal burial areas, bronze workshops, oracle bones, weapons, jade objects, chariot pits, and sacrificial remains. This site transformed the Shang from ancient memory into archaeological reality. Before these discoveries, some people wondered how much of the Shang story was historical. Yinshu answered that question with earth, bone, bronze, and blood. The Shang were real. Their kings were real. Their writing was real. Their rituals were real. And their world was more intense than any simple textbook summary can show. One of the most remarkable discoveries at Yinshu was the tomb of Fu Hao. Fu Hao was one of the wives of King Wu Ding, one of the strongest Shang rulers. But Fu Hao was not just a royal woman sitting quietly in the background. Oracle bone inscriptions show that she led military campaigns, performed rituals, and held serious power at court. Her tomb, discovered in 1976, was especially important because it had not been looted. Inside were hundreds of bronze objects, jade pieces, weapons, and other grave goods. The weapons matter. They support what the inscriptions suggest. Fu Hao was connected to military command. In a world many people assume was completely male-dominated, Fu Hao stands out as a powerful woman whose authority was military, religious, and political. For a foreign audience, she may be one of the most unforgettable figures of the Shang Dynasty. She makes the whole civilization feel less like a list of kings and more like a real human world. Imagine the scene. A Bronze Age court filled with diviners, warriors, nobles, artisans, and ritual vessels. A king asking the ancestors whether a campaign will succeed. And Fu Hao, not as a symbol, but as a commander, whose name was carved into bone and buried with power. Her story shows that the Shang elite world was complicated. It had hierarchy, patriarchy, and violence, but it also had space for certain elite women to exercise extraordinary authority. King Wu Ding's reign is often seen as one of the high points of Shang power. He ruled for decades, expanded Shang influence, and appears often in oracle bone records. His court was active, militarized, and deeply ritualistic. Under rulers like Wu Ding, the Shang state showed its full character, a kingdom of war, agriculture, bronze, writing, sacrifice, and ancestor worship. Yet the Shang were never completely secure. Their world was full of rival groups and shifting loyalties. Their power depended on military success, elite cooperation, ritual legitimacy, and control over resources. If those things weakened, the dynasty could become vulnerable. This is a pattern we see again and again in world history. A dynasty can look powerful from the outside, while the inner structure slowly begins to strain. Later, Chinese tradition says the final Shang ruler, Di Xin, also known as King Zhou of Shang, became cruel, arrogant, and extravagant. He is remembered as the classic bad last king, a ruler who ignored wise ministers, punished loyal people, wasted resources, and lost the moral right to rule. But we have to be careful. Much of this image was shaped by the Zhou Dynasty, the people who defeated the Shang. Winners often write history in a way that makes their victory seem not only successful, but morally necessary. So was Di Xin truly a monster? Maybe he was harsh. Maybe he made serious mistakes. Maybe his court really was unstable. But it is also possible that later stories exaggerated his evil to justify the Zhou conquest. This does not mean the Shang were innocent victims. It means history is political. Even in ancient times, propaganda mattered. What we can say is that by the late Shang period, the Zhou people in the West had become powerful enough to challenge Shang rule. The Zhou had once existed within the wider Shang political world, but over time they built strength, alliances, and ambition. Their leader, King Wu of Zhou, eventually launched a campaign against the Shang. The decisive battle was the Battle of Muye, around 1046 BC. According to later tradition, Shang forces collapsed, and Di Xin died soon after, often said to have killed himself as his world fell apart. The Shang Dynasty ended, and the Zhou Dynasty began. But the Zhou did not present this as a simple power grab. They developed one of the most influential political ideas in Chinese history, the mandate of heaven. The argument was simple and powerful. Heaven gives a dynasty the right to rule, but that right is conditional. If rulers become corrupt, cruel, or incompetent, heaven can withdraw its mandate and give it to another house. This idea shaped Chinese political thought for thousands of years. Every later dynasty had to worry about it. Natural disasters, rebellions, corruption, famine, and military failure could all be interpreted as signs that a ruling house had lost heaven's support. The Zhou used this idea to explain why the Shang had fallen and why Zhou rule was legitimate. But the roots of the idea are tied to the Shang story itself, the belief that political power must connect to a higher cosmic order. In that sense, the Shang did not simply disappear when they lost power. Their world continued to influence the civilization that replaced them. The Zhou inherited and transformed many Shang practices. Bronze ritual vessels remained important. Ancestor worship remained central. Writing continued to develop. Elite ceremony continued. The Zhou defeated the Shang politically, but they also absorbed parts of Shang culture. This is why the Shang Dynasty matters so much. It is not only an early chapter, it is a foundation. The Shang gave Chinese history some of its earliest written evidence. They gave us oracle bones, a direct connection to ancient questions and fears. They gave us bronze ritual art of extraordinary power. They gave us evidence of cities, armies, royal tombs, specialized labor, social hierarchy, and organized statecraft. They gave us Fu Hao, one of the earliest clearly documented powerful women in world history. They gave us a political and religious world where the living constantly negotiated with the dead. And they gave later China a memory of dynastic rise and fall that would echo through centuries. For foreign viewers, the Shang Dynasty can feel both familiar and strange. Familiar because, like Egypt, Mesopotamia, or Mycenaean Greece, it had kings, elites, warfare, religion, specialized crafts, and monumental burial culture. Strange because its most famous written records are not royal poems or law codes, but questions burned into bone. That is what makes the Shang unforgettable. They did not leave us long speeches about themselves. They left us their worries. They worried about rain. They worried about harvests. They worried about enemies. They worried about childbirth. They worried about ancestors. They worried about whether the invisible world was on their side. And that is deeply human. Strip away the bronze, the ritual, and the distance of 3,000 years, and you find people trying to survive uncertainty. The tools were different. The beliefs were different. But the fear was recognizable. Will we have enough food? Will our children live? Will our enemies attack? Will our leaders protect us? Are we alone in the universe, or is something watching? The Shang answered those questions through kingship, ritual, sacrifice, bronze, and writing. Modern people may not share their worldview, but we can understand why they needed one. Life in the Bronze Age was dangerous. Floods, droughts, disease, war, and death were constant threats. In that kind of world, a system that promised communication with powerful ancestors was not a superstition on the edge of society. It was society's operating system. The king ruled because he could ask the ancestors. The bronze vessels mattered because they carried offerings. The sacrifices mattered because they fed a sacred order. The writing mattered because it recorded the questions that held the kingdom together. And that is the key to understanding the Shang. They were not just early China. They were a complete world with its own logic. A world where power was visible in bronze, where truth appeared in cracks, where the dead remained politically active, and where a king's authority depended on forces no one could see. The Shang Dynasty ended more than 3,000 years ago, but its traces are still astonishingly alive. When you look at oracle bone script, you are looking at the ancestor of Chinese writing. When you look at a Shang bronze vessel, you are looking at one of the great ritual art traditions of the ancient world. When you hear the name Fu Hao, you are hearing the name of a woman whose life was almost lost to time, then recovered from the ground. And when you study the fall of the Shang, you are seeing one of history's oldest lessons. A dynasty does not survive by power alone. It must maintain belief. People must believe the ruler can protect them. Elites must believe the system benefits them. Soldiers must believe the king is worth following. The spiritual order must appear intact. Once those beliefs crack, even a powerful dynasty can fall. That may be the most haunting connection between the Shang world and our own. The Shang carved questions into bone because they wanted certainty. They wanted to know what would happen next. They wanted signs from beyond the visible world. In a way, that desire has never disappeared. We still look for patterns. We still search for warnings. We still ask whether powerful systems are stable or already breaking beneath the surface. The Shang Dynasty reminds us that civilization is not born clean, simple, or peaceful. It is born out of fear, labor, imagination, violence, belief, and organization. It is built by farmers and kings, by artisans and captives, by women like Fu Hao and rulers like Wu Ding, by people whose names vanished, and people whose names were carved into bone. So when we say the Shang is where recorded Chinese history begins, we should not imagine a quiet beginning. We should imagine fire touching bone, bronze cooling in molds, drums before battle, offerings placed before ancestors, and a king waiting for cracks to reveal the future. The Shang did not just leave China its first readable past. It left a question carved into history itself. How much of civilization begins with fear, and how much begins with the human need to turn fear into order?